Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you watched my video yesterday, you'll notice that one of the topics I talked about was whether or not Cyril Ramaphosa would resign. And this comes on the back of the meeting that Cyril was going to have with the GNU parties at the Cradle of Humanity. We now have a better steering as to what that was all about. But before we get onto the main news article of today, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you'd like to support the work that I do here, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. I routinely burn the midnight oil, so coffee really does help. So what exactly were they discussing at the Cradle of Humanity? Well, apparently they were busy adopting the new medium-term development plan, nicknamed the MTDP, as their 5-year roadmap. I'm not sure these guys are even going to be in power for 5 years, but okay, let's go through it. What is it supposed to do? Well, the priorities are to tackle unemployment, tackle food insecurity, youth skills, crime, public service reform, all wrapped up in a nice transformative vision for stability. Everything's always going to be about transformation. But okay, so who exactly signed on to this? Well, the leaders of the DA, John Steenhuisen, the leaders of the PA, well, that's Begate and McKenzie, Cornyn Mulder, the Freedom Front Plus, also the IFP and all the other kind of smaller parties in the GNU. But you see, many individuals are noticing that we had one of these development plans before, also called the National Development Plan, also known as the NDP. Now, former President Thabo Mbeki described the NDP as a vision, not a plan. He said that there was no step-by-step implementation or accountability of the plan, and he says that he kind of sees this medium-term development plan as just being a repackaged NDP, National Development Plan. So lots of rhetoric, very little on, well, delivery mechanisms, which is typical. Now, that whole speech that Thabo Mbeki gave around the NDP was actually delivered at the Nelson Mandela University's National Dialogue. And during that, Thabo Mbeki lambasted, I love that word in the media, lambasted South Africa's intellectual elite for producing visions with no executable detail. Because this is what we do in South Africa. We've always got a plan for pretty much everything, but nobody actually knows how it's going to get done, which is why nothing ever actually gets done. I think it was once said, South Africa has all the plans, but none of the execution. So he urged reform of how presidents themselves are elected. He says that the problem goes directly to the president. And so what we should now do is actually be better at electing our president. And how do we do that? Well, he didn't actually say, but he said Parliament never checks for competency. So he says a really good way to at least start this whole debate is get a competent president, because we're not very good at that. Now, his critique underscores a national frustration, like we've all known exactly how he feels at some point in time. We've all seen the endless strategies. Remember, every year Cyril goes before the nation, he says, well, I'm going to create smart cities, I'm going to do bullet trains, and we all laugh silly at him because we know that, to be frank, he can't even keep the lights on 90% of the time. So the fact that there's never any delivery on all these plans, these miraculous things that Cyril says he's going to do, you see a lot of looting, but not a lot in terms of plans. Well, it's becoming very frustrating for a lot of us. And so this message from Thabo Mbeki, to be honest, was aimed directly and squarely both at the GNU and the ANC technocrats, because he knows full well, or we all know, that is that the ANC itself is only there to self-enrich. But I must say that according to Thabo Mbeki and some individuals within the ANC, the only reason that they can't deliver is because the ANC is occupied by apartheid spies. Yes, there's apartheid spies in the ANC and they're undermining it from within. So whenever they need a boogeyman to blame apartheid spies. But I mean, you've got to think to yourself, if these guys were spies at 30, it's been 30 years since the end of apartheid, like maybe a bit more than that, but let's just say 30 years. So these guys are all like 60? So are these like nearly 70-year-old or 80-year-old spies all walking around with their canes and they're like, I'm still spying on the ANC. That's truly ANC. Like, no, these guys are just talking nonsense. And that's actually part of the frustration with the South African psyche, because we're sick of being sold rubbish. That's what we do. We just don't want rubbish. How about just do something? We don't even care what at this point in time. Just do something. That would be a great way to just revive the economy. Like, do something. But they don't, because as you know, the state loves to steal, and we're commonly told that one of the things that we should do, you and I, is trust the state to solve all our problems. Which is why when it comes through to things like crime, we're often told that we should relinquish our firearms. I mean, a gun-free South Africa would be really good for all of us. But in other news, the Auditor General has exposed 650 million rand in irregular SAPs expenditure, which also includes a 360 million rand medical services tender, which was given to the cat, who's also an accuser of attempted murder. And nothing's being done about that because, well, he's a connected individual. Now, the cat's company had no qualifications to actually do anything relating to this medical services tender. They bypassed Treasury's advertising rules, and the tender itself was ultimately cancelled after the police minister Senso ordered a probe into how it was awarded. But MPs are calling it another example of state capture at operational level. Action SA and Rise and Zamzi have both said that police infighting is driven by supply chain corruption rather than service to citizens. And we're seeing the exact same thing in the health sector. And they intermix. People that are involved in the healthcare sector are stealing money from SAPs, and people in the upper echelons of SAPs are enabling crime. That's what you and I are sick of. We don't care about even what you do anymore. Just do something. Because we don't want to see this level of crime and corruption. How do we trust SAPs with our safety when the people involved in running SAPs are corrupt? It doesn't make sense. Now, SAPs have confirmed that there is a forensic probe underway, and the case will be followed up in terms of wrongdoing, and if anything's found, they'll prosecute it. You and I both know that that's a lie, because none of the wrongdoings in South Africa are ever actually prosecuted. That's why we have so many of them. Now, another reason that we have so many of these problems is because in other news, a government audit has revealed that 300 KZN councillors are, well, illiterate. So is there any wonder that KZN is, well, not really doing that well? No, because 300 KZN councillors are unable to read or interpret budgets that they vote on. So these are the individuals you're going to and you're saying, here's a tender, sign here. They don't know what they're bloody reading. They haven't got a clue. And so one researcher found that many councillors nationwide just don't understand their constitutional duties because they're retarded. They literally have an IQ of a cabbage. Now, this is enabling manipulation by party bosses because party bosses know that they can go to these guys and they go, oh, sign this off. And they're like, yes, boss, sign, pay me my paycheck. And experts are warning that this is going to hollow out democracy because it will. Councillors become seat warmers instead of watchdogs. They're there to provide numbers that don't actually provide any substance. Now, there is a way that you could effectively fix this, and that would be to introduce minimum educational standards. Like, you must have a matric. Although I've got to say that our matric these days, maybe that's also not that great minimum bar, but I suppose it's better than nothing. And you could say that there's got to be compulsory government training. Again, I'm a little bit skeptical on that. I've seen how government does things. Doubt it will be that good. You could also have mentoring. All of this are going to be very important as we get through to the 2026 local government elections. But what we are finding is that the very people who run the country are literally retarded. They have the IQ of turnip. And they're the ones making decisions. They're the ones telling you and I, trust us, guy, we'll look after your safety whilst we steal the fiscus dry. And they're the ones telling us, don't stress, like we've got your best interests at heart. But they don't, because they're literally retarded. And then we're told that we've got these development plans with no implementation. So these are the very people, these councillors who are illiterate, that are somehow going to actually have to put this development plan into action. But they haven't got a clue what they're doing. And all the hyenas are sitting there going, budget, sign here. And we're seeing it over and over again in terms of SAPs and medical supplies and the medical industry. It's just so insidious. ANC doesn't have a solution. I have a solution. Get rid of the ANC. We don't want to hear about your stupid plans. We want you to futsak. Now, in other news, DIRCO has responded to the special refugee program for South Africans in the US. Now, DIRCO released a statement on the 31st of October where they basically said they're denouncing the program. Now, this comes as no surprise. If you've been watching the videos on this, so now I'm going to get a load of people go, Byron, you're so happy that it's not going well. Like, just seriously bog off and go watch another channel. I don't know, go watch Chris Riots if you want. Chris the Refugee King. Go ask his opinion. Like, he's favorable to it. I am literally relaying the news. The program is not going very well. It's not taken in the numbers that we originally thought that it would. There were suggestions of like 75,000 at one point. Now it's like 7,500 people. The program isn't doing what everybody suggested they were hoping that it would. Like uplift the whole Afrikaans nation and take it to America. And I predicted it never would. Because anybody that looked at this just with a brain cell would say to it, no country's going to do that. It's just not in their best interests. Now, Pretoria says that the scheme rests on factually inaccurate premises, namely the false claim of Boer genocide. I can't say the actual word that goes in there instead because the video will get struck. But apparently it shows disregard for South Africa's constitutional and legal processes. But you see, Pretoria is done because the whole point of this is to show that constitutionally and legally, South Africa doesn't abide by the Constitution or its legal processes to protect minorities. That's the whole point, you clowns. So you can't say, well, you're disrespecting us. Because, yeah, you're telling us we're not following our constitutional duties and we think that we are, so shut up. You see, now everybody just buys into the ANC bull rubbish like, well, they do. Now, DIRCO cited the Afrikaans community's leaders' own rejection of the genocide narrative, claiming the program was fundamentally flawed. And remember, this was the letter, the counter letter that said not in our names, that was issued. And that letter, it turned out, had actually been authored by DIRCO. So DIRCO is saying, you see, we wrote a letter that says that you're talking rubbish, and so you should believe our letter, even though our letter is a lie and it's a psyop. So, yeah, there's no problem. There's no problem here because we told you there's no problem, so trust us, guy. Problem is nobody trusts you, ANC, because you're not trustworthy. Now, the ministry stressed South Africans' right to immigrate legally, but warned against conflating voluntary migration with refugee status. So the issue fundamentally isn't that people are leaving, because they're saying people can leave legally, and people have been leaving legally for a long time. A point that I made when the whole refugee program was announced in the first place. And for it, I got severely denounced by all the little individuals that had their little fifis broken. But it's a reality. People have been immigrating from South Africa for a very long time. We all know somebody that probably immigrated at some point in time. Now, what Pretoria actually has a problem with is the refugee status, the claim of asylum, because that itself shows that there's something fundamentally wrong with the country in terms of its protection of a people. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point of the refugee program in the first place, is to say your treatment of minorities in South Africa is not where it should be. Now, the statement reaffirmed respect for the US-South Africa strategic partnership, but underlined that South Africans will defend their sovereignty and their factual integrity over politically charged narratives. So this is saying, we value the US, but we think you're talking rubbish and we will fight back against the rubbish that you're talking. Problem is, I don't know if everybody else thinks that you are talking rubbish, DIRCO, because there are actual real issues in some areas of the country, and they do need to be addressed. But whilst you say that the rights of Afrikaners and the integrity of the Afrikaner people, their language, their culture, whilst you say that those can only be conflated with apartheid, and so they cannot be protected because doing so would be protecting the privilege or the history of apartheid, you're going to continue to have problems. You can't get away from this. You need to say Afrikaners have a right to exist. And until you do that, things aren't going to change. Now, are they? In any case, a couple more news articles just before we leave. Let's just have a look very quickly at what's happening in Blighty. And this is the news that, according to the Telegraph, apparently the phrase man of the match in relation to rugby is now offensive, because apparently it means that there's only like two sexes, man and woman. And apparently when you have a man of the match who played rugby, well, it's highly offensive because it doesn't take into account the other 364,000 genders that apparently they invented last week. So yes, let me know what you think of that in the comment section below. Is man of the match now offensive? Shall we introduce it as the they-them of the match? Don't know what these people are thinking. The Zzer of the match? I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, in one last news article, remember when News 24 claimed that there were loads of journalists in Gaza that were all being killed and we needed to protect them because Israel was silencing all the journalists in Gaza? Well, according to news that has now come out from the New York Post, apparently 3 hostages were held in a Gazan journalist's home. Yeah, I really don't have a lot else to say to that, apart from, remember how we said they were the good guys? Yeah, I have to ask questions in relation to that, but I know if I do, I'll be accused yet again of being an Israeli shill or something like that. I'm not supposed to notice the hypocrisy the South African state has when it comes through to other countries, but apparently I'm only supposed to notice it here. And if I notice it in relation to other countries, well, I must be a shill for that country. Like, I don't know. South African logic, baby. In any case, that's the news of today. Nothing else to tell you. Until tomorrow, bye.